All right. This is John Horning with Team Stuttgart, and this is our screencast for September 15th for the second deliverable. As far as last week's progress, we made good progress. We were able to finish the deliverables, and we had 2 group meetings. So as far as what we intended to accomplish, we did accomplish what we wanted to. As far as what went well last week, we were able to finish, which is always a very good thing. But I think that the largest thing that we do well is communication. We have 2 team meetings, and in those team meetings, they're very focused, where we take the time that we're all available to look over the deliverables and pieces to make sure that we're all happy with what we have. And we use those times to update on what we've already accomplished before that, and to also make sure we all know what's being done later in the week. Because even when the week starts, we already have figured out what everyone in the team is responsible for, because we decided and we kind of divvied those up in the very beginning of the project. So even when we go into the first team meeting, people already roughly know what they're responsible for. And so it's less of a let's figure out what everyone's doing and more of a let's see what you've already accomplished, whether it be a lot or little, and figure out what still needs to be done in the future. So it's kind of a planning thing. And then at the end of the week, when we're finally doing our last team meeting, we take a look at all of the pieces of the deliverable that everyone has been working on up to that point. We do our final edits. We discuss what all that's been happening, what's all been done. And then we put everything into the PDF, do the screencast, and finish it up. So communication has been fantastic, because even between those team meetings, everyone's checking the Slack. Everyone's able to access one another whenever we need to, which is extremely valuable. You're not hoping that someone's going to reply within the next couple of days for an answer that you need now. For the most part, you're able to get an answer within an hour or two. And communication has definitely been a strong point. Like I haven't been in many group projects where communication was as solid as it was in this group. As far as what can be improved on, it always kind of ends up where a lot more of the work is being done in the last couple days, or at least it feels like that. Because even though we are working on the project throughout the week, it's there's still a lot to be done at the end. There's a lot of stuff to look at. There's a lot of changes that usually get suggested. But as far as something that we can improve on, you can always have more done before you get to that last team meeting. And ultimately, the goal is to be able to sign on to the team meeting, take a glance at everything, and say, looks good, and submit it. So, if you're able to shorten the time commitment on Sunday, it's a really helpful thing. It gives flexibility to everyone in the group, and it gives more time to whatever else needs to get done for that week. So we can work on that. As far as problems, availability, we have different schedules. So it's not uncommon to have team meetings that have 2 or 3 members instead of all 4, but we still are able usually to have a team meeting that has all 4 members. And even when a member is not in the team meeting, they still know what they're responsible for. They still know roughly what we did in that team meeting, and we're able to function properly. So availability is always a problem, but it's not really catastrophic, and we're doing a good job of working around it. As far as next week, new week, new deliverable. We'll have more team meetings. We'll do our jobs, and we'll do it a little bit better and a little bit faster than we did this week. Next week is about improvement, just like it's always going to be. For our meetings, you'll notice that they are longer, at least on the longer side. One's almost 2 hours, one's almost a bit more than 40 minutes. And it kind of just is briefly saying what were the topics that we were discussing. And just we kind of look at the diagrams, we look at the components that everyone was working on, we discuss them, we change them, and we make sure everyone's on the same page going throughout the rest of the week, or in the case of this one, as right before we turn it, make sure everyone's happy with the assignment before it goes put away. But we had our team meetings, and the team meetings were solid as they always are. Taking a look at the specific diagrams in this deliverable, before I talk about the domain class diagram, I think it's good to take a look at the system class diagram. Because in the system class diagram, we decided against representing the owner class as its own class, like entity class in this diagram, because the owner doesn't really have any specific data that's being stored that isn't already in the trainer class. So we just added the Boolean is owner to every trainer. And then when someone logs in, the system will identify as an owner actor or trainer actor, and it'll send them to the appropriate boundary. Because the only real difference between the owner and the trainers is what the owner is able to do. But those specific functionalities are already going to be in the control classes. So as long as we have the information we need to send them to the correct boundary, we don't really need the extra class. and we just decided that it wasn't worth putting into our diagram and having to work into our implementation, which makes the domain class model a bit more complex, because we had to figure out how do we include the owner actor in the domain class model, even though we don't have an owner entity in the system class diagram. And so we just had owner inherit from trainer, because owner is a specific instance of trainer. And we wanted to make sure that owner was still represented in the domain class model as accurately as possible, considering that the system class model is going to have more specific information and kind of, it's going to be, in a sense, the domain class, like the domain class's older brother. Moving on to the use case model. The use case model is largely the same as it was in the first deliverable. We added the specific actor performing the action as was suggested, and for the most part, the changes made to our first deliverable were just whatever people suggested. The exception is the private class algorithm. People pointed out that we could have had private lessons and the paid for lessons as the same variable, and it would have simplified this algorithm. And they're right, it would have simplified the algorithm quite a bit. The reason that we decided against that was because we need to be able to update the free and paid for private lessons at the beginning of each month. And if you have them as the same variable with no way to distinguish between a free or paid for class, then you run into an issue of how do you store the data and keep it without being corrupted? Because if you have like one paid for class and one free class, and at the beginning of every month, your classes are just set to 2, you just lost your paid for class. And running into issues like that, like you have to have some way to identifying a free versus paid for lesson, and adding in that extra variable just seems like the simplest way to do that without running into issues, even though it does make these algorithms a bit more complex. But it's kind of not, it's not enough extra complexity for us to have decided to store the free and private lessons differently. Going on to change belt rank, it was suggested that instead of specifying the specific rank, it just be incremented. And so within our system, we'll represent the belt ranks as integers, and we'll just have a constant class that every other class implements that has the names of those constants and the names of the belt ranks already in there. For scheduled lessons, this one, we changed the arrow. Someone noticed incorrect syntax. Register new trainer, we added in as alternate. Someone noticed that we hadn't accounted for the error case. For set up new class, this one stayed the same. All right, now we get into our activity diagrams. More or less what they look like. We just got the login, and we made sure that it kind of matched with our UI. And then we have the larger manage new trainers. Got to register new trainer. Delete trainer. And then you have our UI. And the UI, I didn't do it, but I just think it looks really good. And we kind of spent a lot of extra time in our last team meeting was spent making sure that the activity diagrams matched the UI. And you just kind of go through each UI. You've got all the UIs you need. And then kind of the last thing is our personas, which haven't been added to the PDF yet. But things like you've got you've got your specific names, you've got your descriptions, your goals, and all of those are going to be added to the PDF as well as the screencast link. And once all that's done, we will be good for submission. But yeah, all in all, things have been going well. Work's been getting done, and communication's been solid. Next week, we'll get the stuff done, and communication will be a little bit better, and the parts of the project will be done just a little bit faster. All right, thank you.